Friday the 27th of September, which in the evening was the 25th of Elul. We were discussing in the months prior to that, years even, we were discussing this Zohar prophecy based on Bilam's prophecy in the Torah, in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, where Bilam talks about the star of Jacob, Darach Kochav miYaakov, and the Zohar says that that star will appear on a Friday night on the 25th of Elul. And so a week and a half ago, September 27, Friday night, it was the 25th of Elul, and we were expecting to see the arrival of a comet in the sky. Darach Kochav implies a comet, because Kochav is like anything in the night sky, anything shiny in the night sky. Darach implies that it's something that's moving very quickly and has a trail. Right? Derech is a trail. So Darach Kochav miYaakov implies, when we say Star of Jacob, it really implies a comet that leaves a trail behind. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. I don't know if you saw the pictures, but the long-awaited comet that we first spoke about last December did show up, and despite some people warning that it's going to disintegrate or we won't see it or whatever, it'll dissipate or something, it actually did appear. The pictures are really beautiful. If you haven't seen them, you can look it up on the internet. It's a gorgeous comet, and it's there, and it's still there, and it's already visible. It'll be even more visible over the next few days. It should be visible with the naked eye. You can definitely see it if you have a nice camera or binoculars. In some places you could see it with the naked eye now. It's just here we have a lot of light pollution, and it's hard to catch. But the comet did appear, and it's a beautiful comet, and more significantly, at the exact same time, on Friday afternoon here for us, it was already Shabbat in Israel, but here for us before Shabbat, we started getting word that Nasrallah was, what's the word? Retired, and it was the 25th of Elul, mamash, at the same time. In Israel, it was already the 25th of Elul. We were getting the reports right before Shabbat. I was literally picking up my kids from school, and we got the news of it. And right away, people started asking me, so is this it? Is this the person that the Zohar speaks about? So that's what we want to do today, is to talk about, review that prophecy, and did it actually come true, as the Zohar says, and see what's next. Right? Let's review what's to come. The focus is going to be on Lebanon. What is Lebanon? We've mentioned it before. We spoke about it briefly here and there. We recently, when we talked about King Solomon a couple of months ago, the idea of Lebanon, the deeper mystical meaning of Lebanon came up, and there's a lot more to say. So we also want to go deeper into Lebanon, because Lebanon is mentioned throughout the Tanakh, everywhere. It actually appears all the time. It appears in our prayers. It's all over the place in Tehillim. So it appears throughout the Tanakh, maybe something like 70 times. I counted at least 58, but I heard that it's closer to, there's something like 70 mentions of Lebanon in Tanakh. So why is it everywhere? Why is it in our prayers? We say it in Kabbalat Shabbat. So we want to explore that whole concept of Lebanon and tie it into what's happening today and what's going to happen, or what might happen in the days to come, with Iran, Russia, and so on. So that's the goal for today. And so to review the prophecy, just to remind you, we've quoted it several times, but just to remind you what the Zohar says, that on Yom HaShtita, on a Friday, Yitchazeh Bekafhei Yomin Le'ach HaShtita, on the 25th day of the 6th month, which is Elul, like we said, that there will be a star will appear, and it'll appear, it says, Bekarta Chada de Roma. First it'll appear over a certain city of Rome. That's the epicenter, but the whole world will see this star, and it'll shine for 70 days. It'll be around for 70 days. And indeed, the comet that appeared on Friday is still up in the sky and will be there for roughly 70 days. And it says on that day, what'll happen when the comet appears on that same day, at that same time, V'haru yoma in pelun gimel shurin ilayin. 3 big towers will fall. 3 tall structures will collapse in that city of Rome. Mehai Carta de Rome, in that city of Rome, 3 big structures will fall. And ve'echala ravrava inpol, and a great edifice, some kind of great palace, will also be destroyed. Ve'shalita deha'i karta yamut, and the leader of that particular city, the leader of that particular place, will be killed. And there will, from that point, the conflict will spread very widely in the four directions to encompass the whole world. There will be a global war after that event. So that's the first. We're going to continue. That's the first little paragraph here in the Zohar. And if we look at what happened on that Friday, that's exactly what happened. We heard that the IDF specifically targeted 3 buildings in Beirut, 3 large towers. They destroyed 7 buildings, but they specifically wanted the compound, the Hezbollah headquarters, was 14 floors underground, very deep underground, under these 3 buildings. So they had to clear like 7 buildings, but the actual headquarters was 3 buildings. It was built over, it's the basement of 3 buildings. And 14 floors down was their headquarters. And Nasrallah and his buddies thought they were safe over there, but Israel used 85 bunker busters to go down to be able to blast through all the levels. So they used 85 bunker busters to get it, and they destroyed everything. So just like the Zohar says, it was 3 towers above a great edifice, above this Eichala Ravrava, above their headquarters, under 3 buildings. And the 3 buildings collapsed, and this great edifice fell, and the leader of that whole, Hezbollah, which really Hezbollah has taken over Lebanon, much of Lebanon, and so he died. So just like the Zohar says, that's precisely what happened at the right time. It was the 25th of Elul. It was a Friday evening. So just like the Zohar says, it's pretty amazing that it happened. And it's amazing to point out that Nasrallah himself his family is from the city of Tyre. So, which is also mentioned throughout the Tanakh, very famous ancient city. If you remember, King Hiram was from Tzor. King Hiram was the partner of King Solomon in building the Beit HaMikdash. When King Solomon wanted to build the first temple in Jerusalem, he needed resources, and he got, first of all, the foundation, the structure, the actual building, the temple, was built with Arzei Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon. And on top of that, they brought artisans, they brought dyes, they brought all kinds of gold and so whatever, everything that they needed. Much of what they needed to build the temple actually came from Lebanon. King Solomon and King Hiram made a pact, made an alliance. They were very close friends. King Hiram was even friends with King David. And King Hiram is described as the king of Tyre, the king of Tzor, which back then, and we'll talk more about this later, Israel and Lebanon back then were very close allies and interacted with each other very closely, had overlapping territories. And one of the places, interestingly, so Nasrallah is from the same city as King Hiram was, from Tyre, his family is. And it's amazing that one of the places that describes in Tanakh the final apocalyptic war at the end of days, which is, we call it Gog and Magog, and we're going to read about it next week on Sukkot, the Haftarah on Shabbat Sukkot, the Haftarah that you read is Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, which talks about Gog and Magog. That's where the actual term Gog and Magog comes from Ezekiel. But also Zechariah describes the same war in different words, doesn't mention the term Gog and Magog specifically, but clearly is discussing the same war. Many of the prophets discuss the same war at the end of days that we refer to as Gog and Magog. And one of them is also King David talked about it. In a few of the Psalms, he speaks about it. The one that's perhaps the most detailed is in Psalm 83. Psalm 83 says this. First, there's a request, Elohim al domilach, don't be silent. God, don't be silent. Al techerash ve'al tishkot el. No, don't be quiet. Ki ine oivecha yemayun umesanecha nasau rosh. That your enemies are talking too much, and they're lifting their head, and they're very proud, and they think they're going to win. Ya'arimu sod ve'yitya'atzu al tzfunecha. They are conspiring against, tzfunecha means against your treasured ones, against your treasure. Amru lechu, this is what they say, let us go, v'nechidem migoy, let's wipe out this nation, meaning us, the Jewish people, and Israel, v'lo izacher shem Israel od, and let us not have Israel anymore. Let us wipe Israel off the map. That's what it says in Psalm 83. These people are conspiring against you. They want to wipe Israel. Literally, this is the words of Psalms. They want to wipe Israel off the map. Lo izacher shem Israel od. And so you know exactly who that is, because this is exactly their cry, their battle call, whatever it is, whether it's in the Middle East, in the streets of Tehran, or here in the streets of Toronto. That's their call, right? From the river to the sea, they want Israel to be completely wiped off the face of the earth. From Tehran to Toronto, yeah. Ironically, the people in Tehran are very much pro-Israel. A lot of the people over there, the local Iranians in Tehran, they're usually forced into these marches. I know people on the internet email me, even from Iran, and they say they bus us from school, they force us to march, they give us the posters and the propaganda. And so it's not, what you see on TV isn't the reality. It's nice propaganda. The people in Tehran, the good people of Iran, are sick and tired of their evil regime. It's the ignoramuses here in Toronto that are marching of their own will and supporting the wrong side. So anyway, kinoatzu lev yachdav alecha brit yichrotu. So again, they've made this alliance against you. And who are they? And Psalms identifies for us exactly who they are. First, Ohale Edom, the tents of Edom, the Edomites. And we discussed before who Edom is, and we're going to confirm who that is today. Edom is the red, right? The red empire. Edom literally means the red ones. And we've said many times in the past that probably that points to Russia, which has always been the red empire, the red square, the red army. And we'll refine that later on. Edom generally refers to the whole Western Christian world, but specifically this notion of the third Rome. Who is the final Rome at the end of days? All signs point to Moscow, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So you have Edom, ve'Ishmaelim, and the Ishmaelites. Moav, ve'Hagrim, Gaval, ve'Ammon. That's all the region of what is today Jordan and Syria. Right? Ammon is still the capital. Amman is still the capital of Jordan. So it's even mentioned here, Ammon, ve'Amalek, and then Peleshet, the Philistines. We know who today's Philistines are. Im Yoshvei Tzo, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Okay, so Tyre, again, remember Nasrallah and his family are from Tyre in Lebanon. These are the people who are conspiring against you. Gam Ashur nilva imam, and Assyria as well, and the sons of Lot. And then it ends with a little prayer. Asalem ki Midian, ki Sisra, ki Yavin. Do to them what you did to all these ancient villains. Sisra, if you remember, was Yavin, Sisra, from the book of Shoftim and the book of Judges. Nishmedu be'ein dor, hayu domen la'adama. Turn them into dust. Pulverize them make them part of the Adama. And that's quite literally what happened to Nasrallah. It's interesting that Psalm 83 describes this particular group of people, specifically mentions the city of Tyre as being one of these places, people from that city that conspire against Israel. And again, Israel was able to, the IDF was able to crush the Hezbollah headquarters and not just eliminate Nasrallah, but the entire Hezbollah leadership. And then also their replacement, the second replacement and the third replacement. So, yeah, it's not good to be a runner-up for Hezbollah leadership nowadays. And I thought it was also interesting that the report said that they used 85 of these bunker busters. I just thought it was really symbolic on the eve of Rosh Hashanah of the year 5785 to have I thought that was interestingly symbolic, because we talked about 85 being a very important number. 85 is Pei Hey, which has a lot of significance as well. We discussed that before. So on the cusp of the year 85, they Dafka used 85 bunker busters. I thought that was interesting. And so the Zohar, going back to that Zohar prophecy, it says from this event, you're going to have Israel's going to be on fighting a war on four fronts, Dalet Sitrin, and it's going to spread to the whole world in the four directions. And if you look at who Israel's fighting now, you literally have four fronts. You have Hamas in the west. You have Hezbollah in the north, You have the Houthis in the south, right? Those are the three H's: Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, the three H's. And then you have Iran to the east, right? And actually, Iranian proxy groups from Iraq, I believe it was yesterday, sent some drones towards an Israeli base, and 2 soldiers were tragically killed and many more were injured. This was an Iraqi group supported by Iran. So that's coming from the east. So we've got like drones and missiles coming from the east and from the south and from the north and from the west. You have all 4 directions, precisely like the Zohar says. Yeah.
So first of all, it's 7 fronts.
I know Netanyahu said 7, yeah. But literally in terms of 4 directions, yeah.
Okay, these are the directions, fine.
Yeah.
And doesn't the prophecy say Rome?
Right, that's what I'm getting to right now. So this was the thing. Did the prophecy come true? When I turned on my computer Motzei Shabbat, I had like literally, I don't know how many, maybe not hundreds, but many dozens of emails and YouTube comments of people who were emailing me. So was this it? Does this make sense? It's Beirut, it's not Rome. I thought you said Rome, what's going on, right? You can't be right 9 out of 10. You got to be right on 10 out of 10 points. You can't be right on 9 out of 10. So the one point is, it says here, Carthage de Rome, a city of Rome. So the big question was, well, this wasn't the city of Rome. I myself made that mistake thinking, well, what is the city of Rome? We had that whole series on who is the third Rome, right? There was this prophecy in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that there would be 3 Romes and not a 4th. And we discussed this many times in the past. The first Rome was Rome in Italy. When that was sacked, the center of power moved to Constantinople, which was the second Rome. And when Constantinople was destroyed or taken over by the Ottomans, the third Rome was Moscow. And so we've discussed all that before. I was under the assumption that maybe it would be something that happened in Moscow. Some people think the United States is Rome, maybe something in Washington. So what do we make of Beirut? So this is something really interesting, because one of the people that emailed me, actually, a friend named Sean Avraham, he pointed out to me something really powerful. He said, Beirut actually was the local administrative Roman capital in the times of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Right? This prophecy is 1,800 plus years old. So if Rashbi is foreseeing, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is foreseeing this, he didn't say it's going to happen in the city of Rome. He said it's going to happen in Carthage, in a city of Rome, in a certain Roman city. And in his day, Beirut, which was called then Berytus, actually was the local regional Roman capital. In fact, it had a Roman law school, and it had one of the most prestigious Roman law schools in the empire, and many of the great Roman senators and jurists and whatever leaders actually graduated from the Beirut law school. So if you're from the perspective of Rashbi, the prophecy is actually perfectly accurate, because it doesn't say it'll happen in the capital city of Rome. It says it'll happen in a city of Rome, and this was a city of Rome in those days, an actual administrative capital, a place where you can get your Roman citizenship, and so on. So it actually does fit really neatly, and I think it just highlights the importance of reading a prophecy in its context. The fact that he describes it as this will happen in a local Roman city, it actually makes sense, because from his vantage point, that was the local Roman city, was Beirut. And it actually helps us, with this in mind, it actually helps us to confirm who is the third Rome and who is the Edom of our days. Because like I said, there's a lot of people who like to point the finger at the United States being the most powerful country in the world. So maybe the United States is the leader of Edom and this great oppressor and so on. Until now, I get constant, regular comments of people saying, no, you're wrong. It can't be Russia. You just don't like Russians, even though I was born in the Soviet Union. Russian's my first language. My last name is, but no. So people still think it's like something that I have against Russia. I have nothing against Russia. It's just that it seems to be, like we discussed in the past, that Russia fits the bill of Third Rome and Edom much better, because who is supporting Hezbollah? Who is supporting Iran? Right? The two sides of the conflict are pretty clear right now. You have the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia all kind of like on one side, and you have Iran and Russia and Hezbollah on the other side. And Russia, of course, immediately condemned the assassination, right? While much of the Western world was praising the elimination of an actual terrorist, In most Western countries, including Canada and the United States and Australia, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. So most of these Western countries were commending Israel, but Russia, which does not consider Hezbollah a terrorist organization, in Russia, Hezbollah is an official political entity that they welcome, and Russia condemned Israel. And the other country that condemned the attack was Turkey. So you have Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Of course, your three main Israel oppressors today that all condemned this victory, which is funny because the people in their countries were celebrating. I don't know if you saw images. It was all over social media in Iran, in Syria, in Lebanon. There were people having a party, even here in Toronto, the Iranian community. I don't know if you saw, they had a pro-Israel rally. We're handing out sweets and celebrating. They were all very happy for us and for themselves. They're saying, keep going, don't stop, take out our guys too. But Iran, Russia, Turkey were the ones that condemned the attack. And you have to remember that Russia has always been supporting both Hamas and Hezbollah. The weapons are coming to them through Syria, from Iran through Syria. Russia is protecting those corridors, and Russia's always been there. It's not new. You remember even Eli Cohen. How is he? Remember the story of Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy in Syria? How did they out him? His identity was revealed by Russians that were assisting Syria. So Russia, as we discussed in the class on the part 3 of the Third Rome series, Russia has always been a major oppressor, and the Soviet Union has always been very much working against Israel throughout in the past 6 years, in the past 76 years. And we even discussed, we saw some declassified documents that there were Russian agents even in the Israeli Knesset to that extent. That's how far they penetrated the Israeli government and to create chaos in Israel. So I think this just confirms who the identity of the Third Rome is, who is the actual Edom. And remember, Russia is also, we talked about this before, Russia is the one that's actually running Iran's nuclear power plant in Bushehr. Russia is the one that's been, since 1990, supporting the Iranian nuclear program. It was originally called the Persepolis program, the Persepolis Agreement. So Russia is also helping Iran with its nuclear weapons. And as soon as Nasrallah was killed, Russian officials went to Iran to discuss their next steps. And now Russia is expecting, Iran's president is going to go to Russia now as well. So right away, they're collaborating here. Iran's president is going to meet Putin later this month. Russian officials are going to Iran. So I believe this is clearly... Yeah, exactly. So I think this is clearly the Oalei Edom and Ishmael coming together, as it says in Psalm 83. And it also says the same thing in Yechezkel's prophecy of Gog and Magog, which is what we're going to read next week on Sukkot. When Ezekiel describes this alliance, the Magog alliance, who is there? Right? It says, Ben Adam simpanecha el Gog eretz Magog, Nasi Rosh Meshech veTuval. So Magog is like this main entity. And if you remember, Magog is identified from the earliest sources, like Josephus, as Scythia, which is literally like modern-day southern Russia, the Caucasus region, just north of the Caucasus region. So that was our earliest identification of where is Magog, is actually where Russia is today. And who is the first ally listed by Yechezkel, Ezekiel the prophet, when he mentions Magog? Who is the first ally of Magog? He lists all of Magog's allies, and the first one is Paras. Persia is first. Iran is the first ally of Magog. And then Kush, which is somewhere in Africa, Ethiopia. And then Put. Put is what's still today. There's a breakaway country called Puntland. And Punt is like the Horn of Africa and the southern tip of Arabia, that region around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where Somalia is, Djibouti, Yemen. That was the ancient area of Put. And again, that's your Houthis, that's your Somalians, the Al-Shabaab. It's a very important geographical region. There's a little country there called Djibouti that every major world power has a base there. The US and Germany and even Japan, China, everybody has bases in. It's one of the most heavily militarized countries. It's a tiny country and it's full of bases because it's where the Red Sea meets the Indian Ocean. Yemen's right there, and the Horn of Africa. It's a very important place, the Suez Canal. It's like, yeah. So geographically, it's a super important place. That's Put. So the same Yechezkel mentions Put, and then who else with them? Gomer v'chol agapea, and Beit Togarma. Togarma is Turkey, is also here. And Yerketei Tzafon, all the places to the north of Israel. This is the alliance against Israel according to Ezekiel. Yerketei Tzafon, everything that's north of Israel. Draw a line north straight from Israel. The line will go through Hezbollah, Syria, Turkey, and then Russia, basically, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's like literally what Yechezkel says. It's just draw a line straight up going north. And all the prophets say that it's all in the north. Everything's going to come from the north. Yirmiyahu says, Vayomer Hashem elai mitzafon tipatach hara'ah, that evil will come from the north. It's always the north. So you just have to situate yourself, where's Israel on a map, and make a line north, and you'll know exactly who the anti-Israel alliance is. So I think it's pretty clear at this point that you can see who the anti-Israel axis is. And today's big news, when we talk about Russia, Iran, the big news from the last few days, which was not in the mainstream media, but again, a friend, Dodi, mentioned this to me, and then I looked it up, and it is actually real, that Israel, for the first time, struck a Russian base. Yeah, so it's in Syria, the Latakia airbase, and since 2015, it's been operated by Russians. And Iran sent a shipment of weapons. It's a big Iranian Fars 747 that landed there full of weapons. And Israel struck the Russian-run airbase, and Russian jets were scrambled. One of the few times that there was a direct confrontation between Israel and Russia. So things are really heating up in the region on all sides. It's something that you might miss because the mainstream media didn't talk about it too much. Or maybe they did and it was Chag and we didn't hear about it, but it was a footnote in the news. Things are definitely heating up. Now Iran today also grounded all flights. They're expecting Israel to retaliate. They don't know where they're going to hit. The military strategists that I saw are saying that they're probably going to hit Isfahan because that's where Iran's biggest missile factory is. Apparently Israel's saying they're not going to hit the nuclear targets. But the truth is that Isfahan has also a nuclear reactor. So Isfahan is a major place of Iranian military Revolutionary Guard activity, and it has a nuclear reactor, and it has their number one largest missile factory. So it looks like they're going to hit Isfahan. The nuclear reactor in Isfahan is operated not by Russia, but by China. So you add that to your list. Now, Isfahan is interesting. I mentioned it once before, a couple of years ago, before Sukkot. But Isfahan has a really rich history because it was always the biggest Jewish city in Iran. Or for much of Iranian history, they called it Yehudiya, like it was called the Jewish city, Iran's Jewish capital, Isfahan. I mentioned it once because my own ancestors come from there. Going back 7 generations, my great-great-great-grandfather going back 7 generations was from Isfahan and fled because of a new regime that took over. And the last name Palvanov actually comes from him because his nickname was Palevan in Farsi. And then when the Russians took over, Palevan became Palvanov. But the Palvanov family actually comes from Isfahan in Iran. And because it always had a massive Jewish population. And it has a lot of actually Jewish historical sites and holy sites. And one of them is, anybody know who is buried in Isfahan? It's a person that actually very few know, but she is a very important woman in Jewish history. A subtle presence throughout Jewish history. And I wanted to devote a few minutes to discuss her. It's Serach bat Asher. You've heard of Serach?
400-year-old.
Yeah, maybe more. So Serach was the daughter of Asher. Right? One of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the 12 sons of Yaakov is Asher. Asher had a daughter named Serach. Now, why is she so noteworthy? Because in the end of Bereshit, Sefer Bereshit, when it talks about the Yaakov's family, the 70 people of Yaakov's family that moved to Egypt, it's all a bunch of men, right? It's the 12 sons. It's Yaakov, his 12 sons, and all of their sons, and Serach bat Asher. So there's obviously something remarkable about her that she is specifically mentioned by name. But that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is that at the end of the Torah, in Bamidbar, after they've already come out of Egypt, hundreds of years later, who is mentioned again in the census among the children of Asher, and Serach bat Asher is there too, which is wild because this is an event separated by at least 210 years, which means Serach was there coming into Egypt, and she was also there at the Exodus coming out of Egypt. So what is her story? The Torah doesn't actually say more about her other than mentioning her in two very important lists. So she's clearly very important, but who is she? So for that you need the oral tradition. And what does the oral tradition say about Serach? Exactly. So Yaakov, when the sons wanted to tell Yaakov that Yosef is still alive in Egypt, they thought that, rightly, that if they just tell him the news, he would probably have a heart attack, right? He'd collapse from the shock. What do you mean he's alive? All these years, we thought he's dead. I've been saying Kaddish, whatever it is, and now you're telling me he's alive? So what did they do? They had Serach, who was this musician and had a good voice. They had Serach compose a song and sing it to him to calm him down, to put him into the right spirit, and then she broke the news. So she wrote a rhyme, she wrote a poem. The refrain is that, Od Yosef Chai b'Mitzrayim, and then she rhymed that with, and he has sons, Menashe and Ephraim. So it rhymes, Mitzrayim and Ephraim rhyme. That was the chorus. And so she sang that song to him, and the music put him into the right spirit, and then she told him the news. And so he was so happy that he blessed her, and she was blessed to live for many centuries. That's why she had such an exceptionally long life, that she actually merited also to come out of Egypt and lived presumably for many more centuries after that. According to one tradition, she lived for 1,000 years and died around the time of the Assyrian exile, when the first group of Israelites came to Isfahan and would have been buried there. Or she lived even longer, and the Iranian community in Isfahan believes that she lived there until the 12th or 13th century. And she was alive all the way up to that time, and then she was buried, and you can visit the tomb. Well, you can't, but theoretically, you could. A person could visit the tomb of Serach bat Asher in Isfahan.
I just made a connection with the 70, because she, as you said, the 70 nations that went in, and now the star of Jacob, it's going to be around for 70 days.
There's a lot of 70s. Gog and Magog is 70, and there's a 70 times Lebanon's mentioned in Tanakh. You're going to see numbers, there's always number patterns everywhere. So the tradition is she lived 1,000 years, like Adam and Eve were meant to live 1,000 years. And she was buried in Isfahan, and that place was a pilgrimage site, and Jews always went there. And actually, the class that we were supposed to do tonight was about going to Kivrei Tzadikim, because after the last class, I had many, many emails and questions of are we allowed to go to Kivrei Tzadikim? Can we pray at the graves of Tzadikim? So I actually made a class for that. And then with the news, I had to change it and do this instead. So we'll do Kivrei Tzadikim, God willing, next time. Unless something else happens, and then we'll have to change the subject again. Yeah, probably. So Serach had very many important roles over her 1,000-year-plus life, because she was the one that identified the sarcophagus of Yosef in Egypt. Because remember, Yosef, before he passed away, made the Israelites promise to when you will eventually go back to Israel at the Exodus, he said, make sure you take me with you. Take my bones with you. Remember this? Yeah. So when it was time for the Exodus, and all the Jews were packed, the Israelites were packing, and what did Moshe do? It says the Israelites were packing, and Moshe went to look for the sarcophagus of Yosef, because they had to take it with him. But how would he know where to find it? So he had Serach. Serach knows because she was there. She was there at the funeral. So she was able to actually show Moshe where Yosef's sarcophagus was. She also helped King David. We don't have time to go into the story now, but in Sefer Shmuel, there's a story about a certain person called Sheva ben Bichri who tried to start a revolt against King David, and it ended up there was a little civil war. And then it says in Tanakh that there was a certain woman, Vatikra Isha Chachama min ha'ir. There was a certain wise lady, Isha Chachama, that came out and was able to bring peace and was able to get Sheva, arrest him, and bring his head on a platter to King David to end this revolution without harming the people, so that nobody would suffer from this civil war. So basically there was this Isha Chachama, this wise woman, who was able to end the civil war in the times of King David and Yoav. And that wise woman is identified as Serach. Who is the Isha Chachama in the story? That's Serach. So she's there as well. So you see her all over the place as this hidden character. And the Zohar says, and other sources as well, describes that now where is she? She has an academy, she has a yeshiva in heaven, and she teaches there. She's one of the great heavenly professors that's teaching the Neshamot in Gan Eden. There's a description of that in the Zohar. So it's a very significant person, Serach bat Asher. And the fact that it's Serach bat Asher, we're tying many different pieces together here. We have Isfahan and Iran, and we want to tie it back to Lebanon and what's going on in this war. The fact that she is the daughter of Asher is really significant. Because where was the territory of Asher?
It was Israel.
Right. The territory of Asher was in northern Israel. Where specifically?
Tyre.
Right where today, exactly. Tyre was in the territory of Asher. Asher's land was along the Mediterranean coast, what is today like southern Lebanon. And the city of Tyre, was eventually part of the territory of Asher. If you read the story in Tanakh, King Solomon and King Hiram were really good friends, and it describes in Tanakh how they even exchanged cities. They exchanged territories. So King Solomon gave some Israelite towns to Hiram. They even intermarried because Hiram, there's a few Hirams mentioned in Tanakh, and one of them he had a Jewish mother from the tribe, or an Israelite mother from the tribe of Dan. So you had a Phoenician, Lebanese Phoenician father and an Israelite mother. So there was even intermarriage between them. The two people were very close. The ancient Phoenicians and ancient Israel were very close. They used the same exact alphabet. The Hebrew alphabet and the Phoenician alphabet's identical. The language was almost identical. A fun fact, as a side story, you remember Carthage? Carthage in North Africa? You remember Rome and the Punic Wars? Before Rome's golden age, before the Roman Empire, before that, Rome had several wars with Carthage. They were fighting for control of the Mediterranean. Rome and Carthage. Carthage is in North Africa. I think what is today Tunisia. So Carthage and Rome were the two great cities of the Mediterranean. And then Rome ultimately won the Punic Wars. And the most glorious leader of Carthage was Hannibal. I don't know if you remember your high school history. But Carthage, we call it Carthage, but the actual name of Carthage is Karta Hadasha. Karta Hadasha means the new city. Like we just read here in the Zohar. Karta means city in Aramaic and in Old Hebrew. Karta Hadasha is Carthage. And Hannibal, his full name was Hannibal Barca. And there are those who say Barca is a descendant of Barak, who was from the tribe of Naphtali. Remember Deborah and Barak? Barak is one of the great heroes in Jewish history in the time of Judges from the tribe of Naphtali. And so there's a tradition that actually Hannibal Barca is a descendant of Barak, of this great Israelite hero, because Carthage was founded by Phoenician sailors who went across the Mediterranean and founded colonies all across the Mediterranean. Carthage was the Karta Hadasha, the new city of the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians sailed alongside the Israelites. They sailed together. It's described in Tanakh. They sailed to Ophir to bring gold. They sailed along the Mediterranean. So this is almost like one people. Very close, the Phoenicians and the Israelites. So Asher is that territory of what is today southern Lebanon. And what's amazing is that both Yaakov on his deathbed and Moshe, before he passed away, they both gave blessings to the tribes. And both of them blessed Asher almost the same way, with the same key word. You remember what the key word is? What is Asher going to be blessed with? Everybody was blessed with something.
Oil.
Good. Oil. Right. Both of them mention oil. So Yaakov said, Me'asher shmena lachmo. Let his bread be oily. Shmena lach. He will have a lot of shemen. Ve'uiten ma'adanei melech. And he'll have royal delicacies. Let him be rich with royal delicacies. And Moshe said, Ule'asher amar baruch mi banim asher. Let him dip his legs in oil. So, very strange. Both Yaakov and Moshe bless Asher with having oil. Let him be rich with oil. And if you look today off the coast of Asher, off the coast of northern Israel and southern Lebanon, what do you see? In recent decades, they've discovered many, many oil and gas fields. Leviathan, Karish. That's also symbolic, Leviathan. Remember Leviathan? We talked about Leviathan as well. And Leviathan and the connection to Mashiach, who has to slay Leviathan at the end of days. So you have the Leviathan fields, you have the Karish fields, you have all these oil and gas fields. Ule'asher Amar. That's what we read many times on the Simchat Torah, right? It's the Aliyah that gets over and over again. So of course, all the conspiracy theorists, I saw a bunch of, somebody sent me, that Israel went to war because it's all about oil, right? Every war is about oil. So they had to go into Lebanon to secure their oil and gas fields. Yeah, exactly. It's a side benefit to also reinforce Israel's control over the offshore riches. That God in the Torah promised Asher, that this will be the land of Asher, off the coast of Asher. They will dip their feet in oil and they will become very rich from the oil and gas reserves off their coast. And Asher as well, by the way, the gematria of Asher is what? The numerical value, 501. And it's a very important word, a very important number, because when Moshe first met God at Mount Sinai, and he said, "What is your name? How am I going to introduce you to the people?" What did God say? He said, "Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh." So Asher is actually in God's name. It's one of the greatest names of God, one of the holiest names of God that was revealed to Moses at his first encounter on Mount Sinai with God was Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, right? I will be what I will be. And if you look at the commentaries on that verse, what did God mean when he said that? He said, I will be with you now in this redemption, in this salvation out of Egypt, as I will be with you in the future final redemption at the end of days. There's going to be two great redemptions, the first and the final. The first with Moshe, the final with Mashiach. Eheyeh means I will be with you. I'm here with you now, and I will be with you now, and I will be with you again in the end of days. So Asher is actually right there in within God's name. Its numerical value is 501. And there's a lot of Kabbalistic significance to it. Maybe we'll do it another day in full. But the redemption out of Egypt in Kabbalistic sources, one of the angels that brought about the retribution upon Egypt was actually called Taka, Taf Kuf Aleph, which has a numerical value of 501. So even like the angel of destruction had this value of 501. And you see this number 501 everywhere. You know, on the Pesach Seder, we do this strange thing where you dip a drop of wine. You do like a few drops. So you do 10 drops for each plague. And then you do 3 more drops. What do you say with the extra 3 drops? Right. There were simanim, datzah hadash be'achav. What is that? What is the point of that? Okay, so thank you. You've given us an acronym. Like, why is that? Why do we need to say the 10 plagues as an acronym? Who cares? So the gematria of that acronym, the Tzach Hadash Be'achav, is 501. So it's meant to remind you on a Kabbalistic level of the 501, the redemption out of Egypt, the angel of destruction, Taf Kuf Aleph. That's why that acronym is there. It's the 501. So it's also a very important number. I remember back in the Obama years, people used to say Obama is Gog, he must be Gog, and the proof is that the gematria of Barack Hussein Obama is 501. So people were saying, that's when you abuse gematria sometimes and try to find things that, well, who knows. Also the gematria of Ishmaelim, like we just said, Oale Edom ve'Ishmaelim, Ishmaelim is 501, because the whole Gog and Magog conflict is instigated by Ishmaelim. And so that also happens to be
Obama is an Ishmaeli.
Hussein Obama. Yeah. I always found it ironic that right after deposing Saddam Hussein, the president of the United States was Barack Hussein Obama. I always found that, even as back in then, I thought, is that really... Did they just elect another Hussein after deposing a Hussein? Okay, so anyway, that's the 501. That's Serach Bat Asher. There's a lot of meaning there. She's buried in Isfahan. Isfahan is, this is a long tangent, Isfahan is a very important Jewish city in Persian history that goes back to the very first exile to Koresh, to the times of Koresh. Remember Koresh, Cyrus, the first emperor of the Persian emperor, who liberated the Israelites, let them go back to Israel and rebuild to Judea, rebuild the second temple. And Koresh, Isaiah calls him God's anointed one. כה אמר השם לקורש למשיחו לקורש. That Cyrus is described as the Mashiach. And the Gemara asks, how can it, what do you mean Cyrus is Mashiach? Was he even Jewish? He has no connection to Israel. He was a Persian emperor. How could he be Mashiach? And there's an explanation there. There's various ways we discussed it before. There's various ways of explaining why the Tanakh calls Koresh, the Persian emperor, Mashiach. But again, just to emphasize that there's a lot of significance here in all these political events. So that's the significance of Isfahan and Iran and its missile sites and nuclear sites and so on. Funny enough, just one last point on Isfahan. In Muslim tradition, the Muslim Antichrist, the Dajjal, Dajjal? You've heard of the Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, the false Messiah? In Muslim tradition, the false Messiah comes from Isfahan and has 70,000 Jewish followers. That's what the Hadith says. And I imagine it came from the fact that back then, when the Hadith was being composed, again, Isfahan was such a big Jewish city that, of course, they pointed to Isfahan as the place where the Antichrist for them, the false Messiah for them, would emerge. And he would have 70,000 Jewish followers. So the Ayatollahs, the Shia Ayatollahs of Iran, who are very much apocalyptic and have like an end of days mindset, I'm sure this doesn't escape their mind that their tradition is that the Dajjal actually comes from Isfahan also, or has some connection to the Jews of Isfahan. So I find that very interesting. The question is their long-awaited Antichrist, their anti-Messiah, is that our Mashiach? Is their Mahdi our Mashiach? Or is their Mahdi the anti, and you know what I mean? Who are we waiting for? Yeah, Jesus is Al-Masih, but the Mahdi is the final Messiah. See, Islam makes no sense. Because, no, I've said this before. Islam basically has three Messiahs. On the one hand, they accept Jesus as the Messiah. On the other hand, they say Muhammad was the final, long-awaited prophet that the Jews were waiting for. Like the Quran and the Hadith presents Muhammad as the long-awaited final prophet of the Jews, which means they're presenting him as Muhammad is the Mashiach, who brings the final testament. So Muslims accept Jesus as the Messiah, but also say Muhammad is basically like the Messiah and the final prophet and the final revealer of God's testament. And also there will be a Mahdi at the end of days. So they kind of have like three different Messiahs. It's not clear exactly why we need all three. I mean, they have ways to explain it, but it's very confused. Islam does not understand the concept of Mashiach. You don't need three different ones spanning thousands of years. That's not how Mashiach works. It's one and done. That's it. Christians mistake that too in having a second coming. Every messianic movement needs a second coming. We've said this before. Because every messianic movement in the past is a false messianic movement by default. Because Mashiach has still not come. And that's obvious to anybody who looks around and sees how corrupt and broken the world is. Clearly we are not living in the times of Mashiach because the world is still full of evil and suffering and idolatry and so on. And all the prophecies about the Messianic age, that they'll beat their swords into plowshares and everybody will live in peace and unity and prosperity and harmony. That's never happened, which means Mashiach has never come. And so every Messianic movement of the past is a false Messianic movement by definition, because they're believing in somebody who did not accomplish what the Messiah is supposed to accomplish. And when their Messiah dies without accomplishing what he's supposed to, what do? You have no choice but to say, well, he'll be back. He'll be back, guys, don't worry. So Jesus died. He didn't actually accomplish anything that the Messiah is supposed to accomplish. Fine, don't worry, he will. He'll be back. Same thing with Shabbat Tzvi, same thing with anybody. Any messianic movement is built on the concept of a second coming. And lehavdil Lubavitchers have that problem, right? Lubavitchers who still believe that I talked to a woman literally last week. I had an argument with her for like half an hour because she was convinced that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is Mashiach. And you can't, once a person is convinced, it's very hard to extricate them out of that false belief. It's almost impossible. But her thing was, okay, he didn't do it, he'll be back, right? Like, so it's like there's always this thing that he'll come back. That's the problem. Every messianic movement needs their Messiah to come back. But it's not. There's no source for that in Tanakh. Mashiach comes once. That's it. And if he doesn't get a job done the first time, then he's not Mashiach. End of story. That's it. In any case, Iran right now is in a place where they're on the defensive. They're frightened. The Ayatollahs are very scared. They thought that they're protected where they are, but Israel was able to get Khania right in Tehran, right in their most fortified compound, right in the heart of in the place where they thought it would never be possible. Israel was able to get him. So it's amazing what Israel's been able to do with the beepers and the walkie-talkies and the bunker busters and Hania and everywhere in Beirut. Like, their reach has been really incredible. And so the Ayatollahs are definitely terrified and don't know what to do. And that's potentially dangerous, because when you force somebody into a corner, then that's when they do something crazy. And so I think when the Zohar continues, because it's basically saying this, it's saying, Uvemtsaut alma kadit na'ira kochava, when the star, the same comet, will be in the sky during this time, in the center of the world. So think about where is geographically the center of the world. Yikum malka chadra v'shalit be'alma, a great king will arise, or one of these great political leaders. Ve'itgae ruchei al kol malchin, ve'itaer kravin bitrein sitrin, ve'itgabar alayhu. There's one political leader in the center of the world who will start a global conflict. Maybe. But this is talking about somebody who's not part of Israel. So Iran is very central, and it could very well be that this is referring to the Iranian leadership, because if you remember the parallel prophecy in the Midrash, in Yalkut Shimoni and in other places, you've heard this before, I'm just going to repeat it quickly, that Shana Shemelech HaMashiach Niglabo, in the year that Mashiach will come, Kol Malchei Umot HaOlam Mitgarim Zeh Bezeh, all the political leaders of the world are annoying each other. Melech Paras mitgareh b'melech Aravi, and the Persian ruler is fighting the Arab ruler, which we're seeing now with Saudi Arabia and Iran being on opposite sides. And the ve'olech melech Aravi le'aram le'tol eitzah, and the Arab king is joining with the Arameans to the west. And finally, Choser melech Paras u'machriv et kol ha'olam. And at the end, it'll be the Persian king who's going to seek to destroy the whole world, who's going to launch some attack to try and destroy the world. And then the whole world will be shocked. All those pro-Palestine protesters that are waving Hezbollah and Hamas flags, they're going to realize the mistake that they made. Hopefully they'll realize. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. And that's where it says, and that's when the birth pangs of Mashiach that we discussed in the past, that's when they'll really begin. So this is now, this seems to be what's happening now. And Israel will also be, Ve'Yisrael mitra'ashim umitbahalim, and Israel will also be confounded, and they won't know what to do until God will finally say, Omer lahem banai al tira'u, kol ma she'asiti lo asiti ela bishvilchem. Don't be scared. Al tira'u, kol ma she'asiti lo asiti ela bishvilchem. Don't be scared, because everything I did, what I did for you. Al tira'u igi azman geulatchem. The time for Geulah has come. So I think it fits with the two prophecies, kind of fit together, of a king who's going to seek to destroy the world, or a ruler who's going to seek to destroy the world. And finally, the Zohar says that when the star will go away, itkasei kochava, so after 70 years or so, 70 days, izda'aza ara kadisha memhei milin. Then there will be an earthquake in Israel, a 45-mile earthquake in Israel. Now, whether we take this literally as an actual geological earthquake, or whether it's a political earthquake or a spiritual earthquake, who knows? There will be an earthquake in the Holy Land. That's what the Zohar says. So if you count 70 days, it's about the 5th of Kislev. It's also a Friday. It's the 6th of December. So maybe that's the next day to look out for on your calendar. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe. If we're going with this narrative, again, I'm not a prophet. I'm just interpreting a text. That's it. So it says that there will be a certain earthquake in Israel 70 days later. And it'll be around the place of the Beit HaMikdash, where the Beit HaMikdash used to be. And it'll reveal a cave. It'll reveal a cave from underground. U'me'arata ipok eisha takifa le'okda alma. And then a great fire will emerge from there. And from that fire, u'me'ai me'arta yaske chad ofa, a great bird, in some places it says a great branch, or a great bird, ravrava ila'a deishlot bechol alma. And this great bird is referring to Malka Mashiach, that the Messiah, Mashiach, will come at some point afterwards. And if you remember that bird, what is that bird? What is the fire, the flaming bird that comes out of the cave? Exactly. So, if you remember, we discussed very briefly before this whole symbolism of the phoenix, right? I'll come back to that phoenix maybe at the end because we're kind of running out of time. So if we have time, I'll come back to the phoenix, the symbolism of the phoenix. But December, if you count 70 days, it goes to December 6th. And at some point after that, as I've said before, hopefully that points to 2025 as the time for Geulah, God willing. And if you remember Parashat Miketz, which had that little siman at the end, that Parashat Miketz specifically has 2,025 words for some strange reason. And Parashat Miketz specifically is the parsha that says the end. And for some reason, this one parsha, at the end of every chumash, every parsha has a little siman of how many verses there are. Have you ever seen this in the chumash? At the end of every parsha, there's in the chumash, it says a siman. So this is how many verses there are in this parsha. And only for Parashat Miketz, which means the end, Ketz, it says this is how many verses there are, and also this is how many words there are. Strangely, only in this parsha. And it happens to be 2025. There's 2,025 words. For some reason, the sages wanted to point this out to us. So maybe that's also connected to this. So I think it very much is an opportune time to bring Geulah. Hopefully we'll see it in 2025, maybe sooner, God willing. A few more interesting things just to focus on the Lebanon connection. There's a lot more to say here. The events of that Friday, the 25th of Elul, actually that Friday happened to be the 358th day of the war. If you go on the Times of Israel, it always says what day of the war it is. It was the 358th day of the war, and 358 is Gematria Mashiach also. So if you like numbers, that's a really cool connection. There's a verse. This verse was pointed out to me by a friend named Erez in Israel before, like more than a month ago. He predicted this, not me. He said something really cool. He said, if you look at, there's a verse in Isaiah, the last verse in Isaiah chapter 10 which sets up chapter 11. Chapter 11 at Ishayahu is the chapter where Ishayahu describes Mashiach. And right before that, the previous verse, chapter 10, verse 34, V'nikaf sifchei aya'ar babarzel, he will clean up the thickets of the woods with iron. Ve'alevanon ba'adir ipol, and the Lebanon will fall ba'adir. The new state-of-the-art airplanes in Israel, you know what they're called? The new F-35s? They're called the F-35 Adir. All right, that's the new airplanes, the jets that they're using to pummel the terrorists. They still have their classic F-15s, of course. They're using their F-15s, and they also have the new super awesome F-35s, and they're called the Adir. So Erez pointed out to me, I thought it was really cool. He said, it says, Ishayahu says, Lebanon be'adir ipol. It'll specifically be the Adir that's going to strike the terrorists in Lebanon. And it says, of course, that this will happen b'barzel. And if you know the name of the current war is Charavot Barzel, right? The war in Israel, which is generated automatically. Israel, the IDF has like an automatic name-generating system for all of its wars. It's called Charavot Barzel. So it's Dafka. It's saying, in Barzel, you're going to have an Adir that's going to be the one. So I thought that was really interesting. And the significance, this is really significant actually, because the Midrash points to this in Eicha Rabbah and in other places, points to this as saying, what's the connection between those two verses being next to each other? The juxtaposition of Lebanon be'adir ipol, and the very next verses, Vayatza choter migeze Yishai, and that's when the branch of Jesse, Yishai, the son of David, will come. What's the connection? So exactly, when one falls, you should expect, when the Adir in Lebanon falls, you should expect Mashiach. That's the very next verse. This is stated in a few places in Midrash and in the Talmud Yerushalmi as well. So it's something pretty amazing. There's a very big connection between Lebanon and Mashiach. Actually, this passage in Midrash Rabbah begins by saying what is the name of Mashiach, and it names different people. And one of those names is Tzemach, which is a name that comes straight from the Tanakh, the plant, the sprout. And one of those names is Menachem. And the Midrash says, well, no, those are the same name. What does that mean it's the same name? Tzemach and Menachem, how are they the same? Yeah, Bechushbana. In Gematria, they're both 138. It's the same name because they have the same numerical value. It's 138. What the Midrash doesn't tell you, and you have to figure out on your own, is that then the Midrash goes in and speaks about this thing about Lebanon. And you think, well, what's the connection? What does that have to do with Lebanon? Well, the Gematria of Lebanon is also 138. Lebanon is 138, like Menachem and like Tzemach. So it's all actually, the Midrash is secretly telling you this, that you'll miss it if you don't do the numbers, if you don't have your calculator out, that it's actually all 138. So Lebanon has a very deep connection as well to Mashiach, who's coming from the north as well. And we discussed before, if you remember, Lamed Bet Netivot Chochma and Nun Sharei Bina. All of Jewish mysticism is built on, or not all of it, but a major part of it, in Kabbalistic texts, you see this everywhere. You see it even in the Gemara, that there's 32 paths of wisdom and 50 gates of understanding. Lamed Bet Netivot Chochma and Nun Sharei Bina. So put those together. We've talked about this before, so I'm just doing this really quickly. But you have 32 paths of wisdom, 50 gates of understanding. Lev, Lamed Bet Netivot Chochma, Nun Sharei Bina, Lebanon, together. Right? Lebanon is literally Lamed Bet Netivot Chochma and Nun Sharei Bina. And it's like the foundation of Jewish mysticism. So there's this idea of Mashiach being 138, because 138 means mastery of the 32 paths of wisdom and the 50 gates of understanding. The numerical value of Kabbalah itself, Kuf Beit Lamed Hey, is 137. 137. So, and the Lamed Bet and the 50 gates is 138. Lebanon's 138. When you have a number that's one more than another number, it denotes mastery of that number. It's like one above it. Right? It's one greater than. So the idea of Mashiach being called Menachem and Tzemach and Lebanon as 138 is to emphasize the mastery over the 137, over the Kabbalah, which has these two branches of 32 paths of wisdom and 50 gates of understanding.
Meanings.
Right, I'll get to that. I'm going to skip some things because I don't want to keep you here till midnight. Unless you want to stay till midnight. But I put a lot of different ideas down. So now I have to think of what should I skip. No, there's no time for another class. By then there's going to be another like World War III. I'm going to have to... No, because we're not going to have another class until after Sukkot, because I'll be away for like 11 days, and so it's going to be a few weeks. So I'll skip a bunch of different things. There was a whole thing that I wanted to get into about Lebanon, because the temple was built with the cedars of Lebanon. If you remember, the Gemara says that why was the temple called Lebanon? Not just that Mashiach is Lebanon, but why is the master of Lebanon, but why is the temple was called Lebanon? Because Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Lama nikra shmo Lebanon, shemalbin avonoten shel Israel, because the temple used to atone for the sins of Israel. Lebanon literally means the whiteness. Lavan is white, so it would whiten the sins of Israel. And so there's a connection to the temple. And what's amazing is Ishayahu actually says, chapter 60, which is again Ishayahu's vision of the end of days, it says again in the end of days, Kvod ha-Lebanon elaich yavo, the glory of Lebanon will come to you again. Berosh tidhar uta'ashur yachdav lefa'er makom mikdashi umakom ragli achabed. What he's saying is, again, the trees of Lebanon will come to you to rebuild my sanctuary, mikdashi, at the end of days. Which means the third temple is also built with the cedars of Lebanon, like the first temple.
Why does Lebanon have such merit to be? It's not part. Unless it's the part that's part of Israel.
It is, yeah.
But not all of Lebanon.
The southern part of Lebanon is part of the Holy Land. It's also holy. the part where, ironically or not, Hezbollah is rooted, the Bekaa Valley, the Litani River, the coastline, that's all used to be Asher, Dan, Naphtali. That was their territory in the north of Israel. Yes, always. Holy Land is holy problems. Yeah. And the same chapter of Yeshayahu that's talking about the third temple being built with the cedars of Lebanon is the same verse, same chapter that says, Lo yishama od Hamas be'artzech. You will no longer hear Hamas in your land. Literally, it means violence. There will no longer be violence in your land. But it also has a lot more relevant significance to us today that Hamas will finally be gone. You will not hear Hamas in your land anymore. So it's something to look forward to as well. And Habakkuk, which is another one of the prophets, one of the minor prophets, has a vision of the end of days. And over there he also says, he links the two words together. He says, Ki Hamas Lebanon yichaseka v'shod be'emot yechitan. Basically, he's describing, again, the conflict at the end of days, and he appropriately links together Hamas and Lebanon, interestingly enough. That Hamas Lebanon yichaseka, they will try to cover you, but God will save us from it, ultimately. So I think that's a really clear allusion to the Hamas-Hezbollah alliance. Remember, on October 7th, Hezbollah was supposed to also invade from the north. They had several thousand fighters ready, and for some reason, perhaps a miracle or whatever, it's a miracle regardless, because if they would have done that, it would have been even, you can imagine, doubly, triply catastrophic. But for some reason, they failed to pull the trigger, and they actually didn't invade. They did send rockets, but they didn't actually invade with ground forces for whatever reason. But they were supposed to. So I think that's part of this Hamas-Hezbollah alliance at the end of days.
Now they're finding the tunnels are all ready for execution.
Yes, exactly. All right, I'm going to skip this. Two more places that, as I said earlier, that Lebanon is prominently mentioned is in Psalm 29, which is the psalm that talks of Mizmor LeDavid Havu LaHashem B'nei Elim, that we always sing on Shabbat multiple times. And over there it always mentions Arzei Lebanon, right? That God will. You remember? Kol Hashem shover arazim ve'yishaber Hashem et Arzei Lebanon ve'yerkedem kmo egel Lebanon ve'Sirion kmo ben Raimim. This psalm needs a class for itself, so maybe we'll skip it for now. But there's 7 voices in this psalm. The Kol Hashem is mentioned 7 times in this psalm. That's why we read it on Shabbat, because Shabbat, the 7th day, there's a very deep connection to the 7 calls of God in this psalm, and Dafka, one of the calls of God, is specifically mentioning Lebanon. And so you read it, every time you read it on Shabbat, you can meditate upon it a little bit, because it's actually also describing the final events at the end of days to bring about the Messianic age. Because if you remember, the other psalm that we read, 2 psalms that we read, right before we take in Shabbat is this one, and then you do Lecha Dodi, and then Mizmor Shir Le'om HaShabbat. Now it's officially Shabbat. Those are the 2 psalms that we sing on Shabbat. Psalm 29 and Psalm 92. Just reverse the numbers. 29 and 92. And what does it say in Psalm 92? Also Lebanon, right? Tzadik et amar yifrach, ke'erez bilvanon izgeh. So both of them, both psalms on Shabbat, when we welcome Shabbat, mention Lebanon. And what we say in our prayers, that why do we sing that song, Mizmor Shir Le'om HaShabbat? Why specifically that one? B'Shabbat hayu omrim, the Levites would sing this song on Shabbat, Mizmor Shir Le'om HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir Le'atid Lavo, Le'yom Shekulo Shabbat. It's actually an allusion to the final era, the 7th millennium of creation. Remember, the world is 7 days, is 7,000 years. So we sing Psalm 92. It's actually not just for our Shabbat today, but it's actually also a prophecy for the future, for the final 7th millennium, the final Shabbat. But that psalm also, again, mentions Lebanon. So I'll leave that to you to do for homework. Look at Psalm 29 and look at Psalm 92 and think about the significance of Lebanon in these psalms and why we recite them literally every Shabbat multiple times. And the connection of the 7 voices of God in Psalm 29 to the 7 calls of the rooster in Perek Shirah, Remember Perek Shira? Perek Shira is a book that has all of nature, all of creation is singing to God. And it says what every animal and every tree and all the clouds and the stars, a verse. The dogs are singing this, and the snake is singing this, and the elephant is singing this, and whatever. The clouds are singing, and the sun is singing, and the moon is singing. Everybody gets like one verse. But the rooster gets 8 verses. There are 7 calls of the rooster. And those 7 calls, I spoke about this once before a few years ago in the first Are We in the End of Days class. You can listen to that again and you can link it to this because the 7 calls of the rooster neatly parallel the prophecy of the 7 years before Mashiach comes. We've discussed that as well. Remember the 7 years before Mashiach comes, this will happen in year 1. There will be strange weather. And then in year 2, there will be the arrows of famine or plague. And in the year 3, there will be a famine or a plague. And then after that, there will be a recovery. Remember that prophecy? 7 years before Mashiach comes. And after 7 years, Ben David ba. And we paralleled that in the past a few times to the past 7 years, where we had the pandemic, we had the recovery, we had this, and we had the wars in the 6th year and the 7th year. And now we're here. Now we're at the 8th year. We're at 87, 80, 57, 85. So we're at the end of that 7-year cycle now. So you can do that for homework. Take Psalm 29 and parallel the 7 calls of God to the 7 calls of the rooster in the 4th chapter of Perek Shira, to the 7 years of prophecy in the prophecy of the 7 years of before Mashiach comes in Sanhedrin. And you see beautiful parallels between them. It's all connected. So I'll leave it for you to do that. Okay, let's do the phoenix and we're done. The Zohar says there will be this flaming bird that comes out. And remember the legend of the phoenix? It's a bird that doesn't die, it lives for 1,000 years. You remember this? The phoenix is a bird that lives for 1,000 years. And then instead of dying, it builds a nest, and the nest catches fire, and it burns in its nest, and then out of the ashes, a new egg emerges, and from that egg, that same phoenix is reborn. So the phoenix represents as like a symbol of resurrection, and it keeps getting reborn every 1,000 years.
X-Men.
Yeah, like the phoenix in X-Men, yeah. Jean Grey was a phoenix, for sure. That phoenix theme is found everywhere, whether it's in X-Men or in Harry Potter or in whatever. Like a million different pop culture things talk about the phoenix. It's in Greek mythology. It's in mythology from around the world. It's in Iranian mythology. It's in Chinese mythology. It's literally everywhere. And it's in the Tanakh. Sometimes people think it's just a fairy tale, but it's actually in the Tanakh. Explicitly in the book of Job, Eov says, Va'omar im kini egva, I will die with my nest, vechachol arbe yamim, and I will be like the chol that will live many years, many days. And if you open your art scroll and look at the translation, it says, I will be as long-lived as the phoenix. Meaning Job is describing that myth of I will die in my nest and be reborn as a long-lived phoenix. Yeah, in Hebrew it's called ofachol. The phoenix is called chol. Chol means sand or dust, meaning the bird burns up into dust and gets reborn out of the dust. So it's called chol. It's also alluded to in the parsha that we read yesterday, my bar mitzvah parsha, in Ha'azinu. Kenesher ya'ir kino al gozalav yirachef. Kenesher, like an eagle. Not an eagle, but like an eagle, ya'ir kino. So the pshat translation of ya'ir is it wakes up its nest. But that's not how it's spelled. It's spelled with an ayin. Ya'ir with an ayin, like bo'er, to burn, like a bird like an eagle that burns its nest. Kenesher ya'ir kino. It's actually, most places translate this verse in Parashat Ha'azinu as like an eagle arousing its nest. But the literal meaning there is a bird like an eagle that is burning up its nest. It's actually talking about the phoenix there. So even Moshe is talking about the phoenix in his final song before he passed away. And Job more explicitly. And the Midrash says where this phoenix came from. I won't read the whole Midrash, it's in Bereshit Rabbah. How is it that where did this phoenix come from? The Midrash points out that when Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, that made her mortal. Before Adam and Eve were immortal, and then Eve ate from the tree, and she brought death into the world. Like God said would happen. If you eat from the tree, you will bring death into the world. And the pasuk says, "Vatereh ha'isha ki tova etz lema'achal." The woman saw that the tree is good to eat. And ותיקח מפריו ותאכל ותיתן גם לאישה עמה ויאכל. That she ate, ותיתן גם לאישה. That she also gave to her husband to eat. So the Midrash says, why does it say גם לאישה? It should have just said ותאכל ותיתן לאישה. And she gave to her husband to eat, right? She ate and she gave to her husband to eat. So why does it say gam? And she also gave to her husband. What do you mean also gave? Who else did she give it to? So the Midrash says, no, she gave it to actually all the animals. When she ate from the fruit, all the animals came to eat from the fruit. All the animals. And that's why all the animals in the Garden of Eden became mortal. They were all immortal and they all became mortal. And the Midrash says, all the animals ate. Gam, her husband, and her husband ate, except the phoenix. The phoenix did not eat and flew away. And that's why the phoenix remains immortal, and that's why the phoenix lives 1,000 years like Adam and Eve were supposed to, and then resurrects again for another 1,000 years. So the Midrash says that that's why the phoenix is immortal, and the phoenix is the symbol of resurrection. And to bring it back to Lebanon, Lebanon's national symbolic bird is the phoenix. Because the word phoenix actually comes from, in Greek, Phoenicia. Phoenicia is Lebanon. Phoenicia is that land. And the original myth was that the phoenix roosts, it builds its nest in one of the Lebanese trees. So there's a clear link between the phoenix and the land of Phoenicia, which is northern Israel, Lebanon. It's all connected. And Beirut itself, one of the nicknames for the city of Beirut, is the phoenix of the Mediterranean, because Beirut's been actually destroyed and rebuilt so many times in its 5,000-year history. So to bring it all back to Beirut as this local regional Roman capital that keeps getting destroyed and resurrected, the connection between the phoenix, Phoenicia, Lebanon, Beirut, Rome, all of this, the symbol of the phoenix in Moshe's final speech to his people, it's all connected. So there's a lot to meditate on over there. The phoenix as a symbol of Mashiach, which we discussed in the class on Mashiach ben Yosef. The phoenix is described as a symbol of Mashiach ben Yosef. Again, it's all connected to the land. Serach bat Asher, identifying the sarcophagus of Yosef and his bones that are resurrecting in Mashiach ben Yosef. You can link all this tonight when you're sleeping. Put it all together. Organize it in your mind. And I promise you, it'll make sense. And just to conclude, with the phoenix was in the Garden of Eden. It was the only species that didn't consume from the fruit, so it was not tainted by death. It was not tainted by the Nachash. And you remember the Nachash is what caused mankind to be exiled from Eden, and it brought all this death into the world and suffering. And the whole idea of Mashiach, of that Mashiach consciousness and bringing about Geula and awaiting Geula. What does that mean, Geula? What does that? It means coming back to the Garden of Eden. That's really what Mashiach symbolizes. If you remember the idea of Mashiach as being the serpent holder, the person who subdues the snake, the gematria of Mashiach is Nachash. Nachash is 358. Mashiach is 358. Because Mashiach is supposed to reverse the damage of the Nachash, bring us back into the Garden of Eden. And that's where the whole phoenix symbolism is, that we're going to be like the phoenix again, like immortal, untainted by death, by suffering, by the serpent. That's the world that we're headed. That's what all of this is for. That's ultimately what this is all about, to see Geula, to restore that perfect, united, harmonious, peaceful world, the Garden of Eden. And hopefully we merit to see that very soon in the coming months, God willing. So may we only have besorot tovot in the coming days. And I wish you all Gmal Chatima Tova, Chag Sameach. See you in a few weeks.